The message reached me at 0347 hours local time while I was reviewing intelligence reports in a forward operating base outside Kandahar. The blue glow of my phone's screen cut through the darkness of the communications tent, and for a moment, I stared at Diane's words without processing them. Around me, the constant hum of generators and distant radio chatter provided the soundtrack to another sleepless night in Afghanistan. But suddenly all I could think about was the two-story colonial house where I'd learned to ride a bike in the driveway and built a treehouse in the old oak out back. Dad had been gone for 3 weeks. The memorial service had happened while I was stuck in a classified operation I couldn't leave, and now his widow, my stepmother of barely 2 years, was informing me via text message that my childhood home no longer belonged to me. I set the phone down and returned to the satellite imagery spread across my desk. As a military intelligence analyst specializing in financial warfare and economic disruption tactics, I'd spent the last 8 years learning how money moved through complex international networks, how businesses could be leveraged and controlled, and how the right pressure applied to financial weak points could topple entire operations. What Diane didn't know, what nobody back home knew, was that my military salary was supplemented by substantial returns from a private investment portfolio I'd been building since my first deployment. While my peers spent their leave drinking and gambling, I'd been studying market patterns, building relationships with financial contacts, and quietly acquiring assets through a series of shell companies. My specialty in tracking terrorist financing had taught me how to move money invisibly, and I'd applied those same principles to legitimate investments with remarkable success. But none of that mattered at 0347 hours in a tent in Afghanistan. What mattered was that the woman who'd married my father during his cancer treatments had just erased the last physical connection to my childhood. I picked up my phone and scrolled through our previous message history. The last conversation had been 2 months ago, when I'd asked about Dad's condition. Her responses had been brief, clinical. He's resting. The doctors are managing his pain. No need to worry. Not once had she mentioned that his condition was terminal, that I should request emergency leave, that I might want to say goodbye. Now I understood why. With Dad gone and me deployed overseas, she'd had free rein to handle his estate however she chose. The house, purchased by my father 23 years before he'd even met Diane, was apparently now hers to dispose of. I typed several responses and deleted them all. Finally, I closed the message without replying. Diane wanted a reaction. Anger, pleading, desperation. She wouldn't get one from me. Instead, I opened my secure laptop and accessed my investment accounts through encrypted channels. The numbers were larger than anyone back home would believe. $3.7 million spread across various portfolios, accumulated through careful reinvestment of deployment bonuses, hazard pay and remarkably prescient bets on emerging technologies. My colleagues saw a quiet intelligence analyst who lived modestly and avoided the usual military social scene. They had no idea I'd been building the foundation of a financial empire. I spent the next hour researching property records for my hometown, tracing ownership through county databases I could access through military intelligence networks. The house had indeed been sold, to a local development company called Hartwell Properties, owned by someone named Gerald Hartwell. A quick search revealed that Hartwell specialized in buying older homes in established neighborhoods, renovating them and flipping them for substantial profits. My childhood home with its worn hardwood floors and the kitchen where Dad had taught me to make pancakes on Sunday mornings, was now just another investment property to be gutted and resold to the highest bidder. The anger I'd been suppressing finally surfaced, cold and calculating. Diane had made a mistake. She'd assumed that being overseas made me powerless, that distance equaled irrelevance. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Over the following weeks, I began researching Diane's family with the same methodical thoroughness I applied to analyzing enemy financial networks. Her brother Jake ran Thompson Construction, a mid-sized commercial building company that had been struggling with cash flow problems since the 2008 recession. Her nephew Ryan worked as a project manager, while her younger brother Pete handled equipment maintenance. The company employed about 40 people and held contracts for several municipal projects, but their financial reports showed concerning debt-to-equity ratios and recurring issues with project delays. Thompson Construction was vulnerable, and vulnerability was something I knew how to exploit. I started by having my stateside legal team quietly purchase Thompson's outstanding debts from various creditors. Bank loans, equipment financing, supplier credit, All of it acquired at discounts through intermediary companies that couldn't be traced back to me. Within 2 months, I owned roughly 60% of Thompson Construction's total debt obligations. The second phase involved acquiring their major contracts. Municipal construction projects often changed hands when financial backing shifted, and I had the resources to outbid Thompson on several upcoming jobs. My newly created construction management company, Phoenix Development LLC, began submitting competitive bids that undercut Thompson's prices while offering superior timelines and guarantees. All of this happened while I was still deployed, managing operations through secure communications and trusted intermediaries. My commanding officers saw a dedicated analyst who worked late into the night. They didn't realize I was orchestrating a complex financial acquisition from 8,000 miles away. The breakthrough came during my final month overseas, when Thompson Construction failed to make a critical loan payment. As the primary creditor, Phoenix Development LLC was legally entitled to initiate collection proceedings, or offer alternative arrangements. That's when I made the call. I'd been back stateside for exactly 6 days when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but I'd been expecting this call for weeks. "Hello." I answered, though I already knew who it was. Are you the owner of Phoenix Development?" The voice was shaky, desperate. It was Diane. Speaking. "This is Diane Thompson. My family's construction company. We got a notice that our debt has been sold to your company." Jake is beside himself. "We've been with the same bank for 15 years, and suddenly they're saying some Phoenix Development owns our loans now." I sat in my austere apartment, the same temporary housing I'd been assigned since returning from deployment, and smiled at the irony. Diane had stripped away my connection to home, and now she was calling the person who held her family's financial future in his hands, without having any idea who she was talking to. "Mrs. Thompson, debt sales are common business practices. Your family's loans were purchased as part of a larger portfolio acquisition. But nobody told us. Jake tried calling the bank and they just gave him a phone number for your company. He's been trying to reach someone for 3 weeks. I apologize for the delay. I've been overseas on business. But I'm back now and I'd be happy to discuss your situation." The desperation in her voice was palpable. "Look, I know we've had some late payments, but Thompson Construction has been in business for 23 years. We're good people, we pay our bills. There has to be something we can work out." "I'm sure there is. Why don't we meet in person? I prefer face-to-face discussions for significant financial arrangements." "Yes, absolutely. Jake can come to your office whenever you're available. He's cleared his whole schedule. Actually, I'd prefer to meet at your brother's office. I like to see the operations I'm potentially working with." We arranged to meet the following Thursday at 2 p.m. After hanging up, I drove through my old neighborhood for the first time since returning home. The house where I'd grown up had been transformed. New siding, professional landscaping, a sold sign planted in the front yard. Someone else's car sat in the driveway where Dad's old pickup used to leak oil onto the concrete. I parked across the street and stared at the building that no longer held any connection to my family. The treehouse was gone, cut down to make room for a deck addition. The garden where Mom had grown tomatoes before she died had been replaced with decorative stones and non-native plants that required minimal maintenance. Diane had erased not just my claim to the property, but the memory of what it had been. Thursday arrived with unexpected autumn warmth and I dressed carefully for the meeting. Business casual, khakis, button-down shirt, no visible indicators of military service or significant wealth. I wanted to look like exactly what Diane expected. Another faceless corporate entity there to discuss loan terms. Thompson Construction occupied a converted warehouse on the industrial side of town, surrounded by equipment yards and fabrication shops. I parked next to a dusty pickup truck and walked through the front door into a cramped office that smelled of coffee and construction dust. 3 people waited in the conference room. Jake Thompson, a weathered man in his 50s whose calloused hands and sun-damaged skin spoke of decades in construction. Ryan, younger and softer, clearly more comfortable with paperwork than actual building, and Diane. She looked older than I remembered, stress lines deepening around her eyes, her highlighted hair showing gray roots. When she saw me, her expression was politely anxious. The look of someone trying to make a good impression on a person who held considerable power over her family's future. "Mr. Jake stood and extended his hand. "Phoenix. I said, using the name I'd established for the company. Thank you for meeting with me. Thank you for coming here, Diane interjected quickly. We really appreciate you taking the time to understand our situation. I sat across from them at the scarred conference table, noting the framed family photos on the walls, the community service awards, the evidence of a business built on relationships and local reputation. This was exactly the kind of operation that could be destroyed by the right financial pressure, or saved by the right arrangement. I've reviewed your company's financial history, I began, opening a folder of documents my team had prepared. Thompson Construction has been profitable for most of its existence, but the last several years have been challenging. Jake nodded grimly. The recession hit us hard and we never fully recovered. Big contractors from out of state keep underbidding our proposals, and material costs have been unpredictable. The municipal contracts have kept us afloat, Ryan added, but the margins are thin. We've had to lay off 6 people this year. I studied their faces, seeing genuine worry about their employees, their community relationships, their family legacy. Under different circumstances, I might have felt sympathy for their situation. Phoenix Development is prepared to restructure your debt obligations, I said, but we'd want operational oversight to ensure the company's long-term viability. What kind of oversight? Diane asked, her voice tight with concern. Management consulting, financial controls, strategic planning. Think of it as a partnership rather than a traditional creditor relationship. Jake and Ryan exchanged glances. This was better than foreclosure, but it meant giving up significant control of their family business. We'd need to see specific terms, Jake said carefully. Of course. I slid a contract across the table. This outlines the basic structure. Take your time reviewing it. As they huddled over the document, I watched Diane's face. She was reading quickly, her business experience helping her understand the implications faster than her relatives. What she saw was a fair deal, better than they had any right to expect given their financial position. What she didn't see was the signature at the bottom of the page, or the corporate registration that would reveal Phoenix Development's true ownership. This seems very generous, Jake said finally. Most banks would just call our loans and force us into bankruptcy. Phoenix Development isn't most banks. We prefer to work with established businesses that have strong community ties. There's one thing, Diane said, her voice hesitant. The contract mentions that Phoenix Development is a privately held company, but it doesn't list the ownership structure. For something this significant, we'd like to know who we're really partnering with. I smiled and reached into my briefcase, pulling out a second set of documents. Full disclosure documentation. Corporate structure, ownership details, everything you'd need for due diligence. I placed the papers in front of Diane and watched her face as she read. Her expression shifted from curiosity to confusion to dawning horror as she processed what she was seeing. Phoenix Development LLC, wholly owned subsidiary of Riverside Holdings Incorporated by. Her voice trailed off as she reached the name at the bottom of the incorporation documents. Michael Thompson Harrison, I said quietly. That's me. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of construction equipment in the neighboring yards. Jake stared at the papers, then at me, clearly not understanding the significance. Ryan looked confused, waiting for someone to explain what was happening. But Diane understood. Her face had gone pale, and her hands were trembling as she set down the documents. She whispered. Michael Harrison. Your stepson. The one whose childhood home you sold while he was deployed overseas. Jake's confusion deepened. Diane, who is this man? He's David's son, she said, her voice barely audible. My stepson. The pieces clicked into place for Jake and Ryan. They looked between Diane and me, suddenly understanding that this business meeting had layers of personal history they hadn't been aware of. You bought our debt, Diane said, and I could hear the accusation in her voice despite her obvious fear. You've been planning this. I've been conducting business, I replied calmly. Thompson Construction had debts for sale, and Phoenix Development was interested in acquiring them. The fact that we're related is coincidental. Coincidental, she repeated bitterly. Let's focus on the business arrangement, I said, redirecting the conversation. The contract offers Thompson Construction a path forward that protects your employees and preserves the family business. I'd suggest you consider it carefully. Jake found his voice. Michael, I don't understand what's happening here, but if there are family issues. There are no family issues, I interrupted. There's a business opportunity. Phoenix Development is offering to restructure Thompson Construction's debt obligations and provide operational support. The personal relationship between Mrs. Thompson and myself is irrelevant to this transaction. But it wasn't irrelevant, and everyone in the room knew it. Diane was trapped, understanding that her family's livelihood now depended on the mercy of the stepson she dismissed and discarded. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I want Thompson Construction to succeed," I said truthfully. "It's a good company with a solid reputation. Under proper management it could be very profitable. And if we don't sign?" I met her eyes across the table. "Then Phoenix Development will exercise its rights as the primary creditor. Thompson Construction will be forced into bankruptcy, the assets will be liquidated, and 40 people will lose their jobs." The choice was clear and we all knew it. Jake signed the contract that afternoon, officially making Phoenix Development the majority stakeholder in Thompson Construction. I implemented new financial controls, brought in additional contracts, and within 6 months, the company was more profitable than it had been in a decade. Diane kept her administrative position, though she now reported to managers I'd hired. We maintained professional courtesy during the quarterly meetings, but we both understood the new dynamic. She'd gambled on my powerlessness and lost everything. The house where I grew up was eventually resold by Hartwell Properties to a young family with 2 children. Sometimes I drive by and see bicycles in the driveway, toys scattered across the lawn that was once my mother's garden. Looks like a home again, which is more than Diane ever gave it. As for Thompson Construction, it's thriving under Phoenix Development's management. We've expanded into 3 new markets and hired back all the employees who'd been laid off. Jake runs day-to-day operations while I handle strategic planning and major contracts. It turns out that sometimes the best revenge isn't about destruction. It's about proving that the person they underestimated was the one who could save them all along.